My name is Ronnie, 35 years old, and I just watched my family dinner explode into chaos. After losing my daughter Emily to cancer last year, I discovered something unforgivable. My parents had been secretly funding my sister's kids' private education while telling me they couldn't help with Emily's treatment. For years, Jessica was the golden child, but tonight that favoritism finally came to light. The truth about Emily's lost chance hit the table like a bomb. Before I tell you how the dinner table exploded tonight, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family who've wronged you. Growing up in suburban Michigan, the signs were always there, but I never wanted to admit it. Our family looked normal from the outside, middle-class home to kids' family dinners, but beneath that veneer ran currents of favoritism that would eventually culminate in the most painful betrayal of my life. My father, Harold, built his career as a mechanical engineer. He was stern, practical, and had high expectations. Those expectations, however, seemed to bend and shift depending on which child he was addressing. My mother, Martha, worked as an elementary school teacher before retiring. She projected warmth to the community, but harbored an intricate system of judgment that I felt the brunt of from an early age. Then there was Jessica, my sister, 2 years younger, and the undisputed favorite. Her report cards earned places of honor on the refrigerator, while mine were met with questions about why that B+ wasn't an A. When Jessica won her regional spelling bee in 8th grade, my parents took the entire family out to the fanciest restaurant in town. When I made the state finals in the science competition that same year, I got a pat on the back and a good job. These disparities continued into high school. Jessica's participation in debate club warranted new outfits and weekend trips for competitions. My interest in computer programming was dismissed as playing on computers. The pattern was consistent but subtle enough that complaining about it would sound like petty jealousy. College marked another stark contrast. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus IT department and took out loans to cover what my scholarships didn't. Meanwhile, Jessica received a full ride not from merit scholarships, as she let everyone believe, but from our parents' checkbook. I only discovered this years later, when Mom accidentally mentioned their monthly payments during a Thanksgiving dinner. Despite everything, I tried to build my own life. After graduating with my computer science degree, I secured a position as an IT specialist at Riverside Memorial Hospital. The pay was good, the benefits solid, and the work interesting enough. At 25, I married Sarah, my college girlfriend. We had dated for 3 years and everything seemed to be falling into place. Emily came along when I was 27, a tiny bundle with curious eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. From the moment she was born, she became my world. Sarah, however, struggled with motherhood in ways neither of us anticipated. Postpartum depression gave way to increasing distance, and by the time Emily turned 3, Sarah decided she couldn't handle parenthood. The divorce was quick. Sarah moved to Oregon for a fresh start and has only maintained sporadic contact with Emily through occasional video calls on birthdays and Christmas. Becoming a single father was never in my plan, but Emily and I developed a rhythm. We had breakfast together every morning. She always wanted strawberries cut into heart shapes. I arranged my work schedule to accommodate school pickup, and we spent evenings building elaborate Lego creations or reading stories where she insisted on doing all the character voices. While I was rebuilding my life around my daughter, Jessica's trajectory continued its golden path. Her law degree from an Ivy League university, funded entirely by our parents, led to a position at a prestigious firm, though she quit within 2 years after marrying Richard, a wealth manager at one of the largest banks in the Midwest. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at a lakeside resort, with our parents beaming with pride and handling at least half the considerable expenses. Within 3 years, Jessica gave birth to twin boys, Alexander and William. My parents transformed into doting grandparents overnight, buying custom-made outfits and driving 2 hours each way every weekend to visit. Their behavior with the twins stood in stark contrast to their interactions with Emily. While they remembered her birthdays and occasionally took her shopping, there was always a palpable difference in enthusiasm. Jessica and Richard built a 5-bedroom house in Lakeview Hills, the most exclusive neighborhood in our area. Their home featured in a local magazine's luxury living, spread complete with a professional kitchen Jessica rarely used, and a home theater where Richard hosted football watch parties. They took annual vacations to Europe, or tropical islands documented meticulously on Jessica's social media accounts. Throughout all this, I maintained a relationship with my parents out of a sense of duty and the hope that Emily would have grandparents in her life. We attended Sunday dinners at their house twice a month, where Jessica's accomplishments, or more often her children's, dominated conversation. I watched as Emily tried to share stories about school or her latest art project, only to be interrupted by updates about the twins' piano recitals or swimming lessons. Jessica's entitlement grew with each passing year. She expected our aging parents to babysit on short notice, complained when birthday gifts weren't extravagant enough, and spoke condescendingly about my modest 3-bedroom ranch house. Yet our parents never called her out, instead making excuses for her behavior or changing the subject. Despite all this, Emily adored her grandparents. She made handmade cards for their anniversaries and always picked out thoughtful Christmas gifts with her limited allowance money. She never noticed, or at least never mentioned, how her cousins received more attention and praise. Her capacity for love without keeping score made what happened later all the more devastating. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. Emily, 8 years old and full of energy, had complained about feeling tired for a couple of weeks. I'd noticed some bruising on her legs that seemed excessive for a kid who played normally. She'd had a lingering cold that wouldn't quite go away. Nothing alarming in isolation, but together enough for me to schedule a doctor's appointment. I expected antibiotics for an infection or maybe iron supplements. Instead, our family doctor looked concerned after examining Emily and ordered blood tests immediately. By that evening, we were sitting in an oncologist's office at the Children's Hospital, trying to comprehend words that seemed impossible: acute lymphoblastic leukemia, aggressive, advanced. The next days passed in a blur of bone marrow biopsies, more blood tests, consultations, and Emily's frightened questions that I struggled to answer honestly while maintaining hope. Dr. Graham, a pediatric oncology specialist with kind eyes and a gentle manner, explained the treatment protocol: intensive chemotherapy, beginning immediately, followed by maintenance therapy that could last for years. "Daddy, am I going to die?" Emily asked. On our third night in the hospital, her small hand gripping mine, her hair still intact but not for long. "No, sweetie," I told her, with a conviction I desperately wanted to feel. "We're going to fight this together. You're the strongest person I know." Her smile, that smile that had always been my anchor, wavered but held. "Okay, but can I still have ice cream for breakfast sometimes?" Ice cream for breakfast becomes an official rule when you're fighting cancer. I promised, swallowing the lump in my throat. As Emily began treatment, the emotional devastation was matched by another harsh reality: the financial burden. My insurance covered the standard protocol, but Dr. Graham had mentioned a newer targeted therapy, showing remarkable success rates for Emily's particular genetic markers. The catch: it was still considered experimental by insurance standards and would cost nearly $80,000 out of pocket. I spent nights poring over spreadsheets after Emily fell asleep. My savings, approximately $35,000 set aside for Emily's college fund, would cover less than half the treatment. I picked up weekend and evening shifts, driving for a rideshare company, coming home exhausted to review medical bills and research assistance programs. A coworker helped me set up a GoFundMe campaign that raised $12,000, generous, but still far short of what we needed. Local news covered Emily's story, and a few small businesses held fundraisers. Every dollar helped, but the gap remained substantial, and time was running out for the treatment to be most effective. With reluctance and swallowed pride, I approached my parents one Sunday after dinner, while Emily was playing with the twins in the backyard. We sat at their kitchen table, the same spot where family discussions had occurred throughout my childhood. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." I began my rehearsed speech, suddenly inadequate. "Emily's standard treatment is covered, but there's a specialized therapy that could significantly improve her chances. Insurance won't cover it, and I'm still about $30,000 short." My father's face immediately tightened. "How much is this treatment costing?" When I told him the full amount, he whistled low. "That's a lot of money for something experimental." "It's shown a 70% success rate in cases like Emily's," I explained, pulling out the medical journal articles I'd printed. The standard treatment only offers about 40%. My mother glanced at the papers but didn't take them. We're on a fixed retirement income, Ronnie. You know that. I'm not asking for a gift, I clarified. It would be a loan. I can pay it back over time. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. My father cleared his throat. We'll have to look at our finances and see what's possible. We're not making any promises. We'll pray for Emily, my mother added, patting my hand. God works in mysterious ways. I left with vague assurances they'd see what they could do. Days passed, then weeks, without any follow-up from them. When I called to ask, there were always excuses. They were still figuring things out. They needed to talk to their financial advisor. They had unexpected expenses come up. Meanwhile, Emily started chemotherapy. Her beautiful brown hair fell out in clumps until we made it a special day to shave her head together. She named her IV pole Ferdinand and drew a smiling face on the bag of fluids. Even as nausea and fatigue became constant companions, she maintained a bravery that humbled me. Jessica visited the hospital exactly twice during Emily's initial 6-week stay. Both times she complained about the parking situation and brought gifts that were wildly age-inappropriate makeup for a child too sick to care, clothes several sizes too large to grow into. My parents came weekly, bringing store-bought cookies and awkward conversations, staying exactly 1 hour before finding reasons to leave. At family gatherings, which became less frequent as Emily's condition dominated my life, Jessica would place her hand dramatically over her heart. "We're all just so worried about little Emily," she would announce, before seamlessly transitioning to stories about the twins' latest accomplishments. My parents nodded sympathetically when Emily's treatment was mentioned, but quickly changed the subject. They never offered to stay with her so I could work a full shift or get proper rest. They never volunteered to help with the mountain of medical paperwork or hospital bills covering my dining room table. Emily noticed. One evening after they'd left following a particularly brief visit, she looked at me with eyes too wise for her years. "Grandma and Grandpa don't like hospitals, do they, Daddy?" "They're from a different generation, sweetie," I said, searching for an explanation that wouldn't hurt her. "Hospitals make them uncomfortable." "It's okay," she said, adjusting her knit cap over her bald head. "You're here all the time. That's what matters." Her understanding broke my heart and strengthened my resolve. If my parents wouldn't help, I would find another way. But as Emily's first round of treatment failed to produce the hoped-for results, my determination began to mix with a growing resentment toward my family's absence when we needed them most. 3 months into Emily's treatment, Dr. Graham called me into her office to discuss the latest test results. The standard protocol wasn't working as well as they'd hoped. Emily's cancer was stubborn, fighting back against the medications that were supposed to save her. "There's a specialized treatment center in Houston," Dr. Graham explained, her normally confident voice tinged with concern. "They're doing remarkable work with cases similar to Emily's. I'd like to refer her there for evaluation and possibly for their enhanced protocol." My throat tightened. What would that involve? Initially, a 2-week stay for comprehensive testing and treatment planning. After that, potentially 6 to 8 weeks of intensive therapy. The good news is that they're seeing much better outcomes for resistant cases like Emily's. I asked the question I dreaded. What about insurance coverage? Her hesitation told me everything. They'll cover the standard portions, but the center uses integrated approaches that are still classified as investigational. The out-of-pocket costs would be substantial, possibly $60,000 to $70,000, including travel and accommodation. The amount might as well have been $1 million. I'd already depleted my savings, maxed out a credit card, and was working every spare hour possible. The GoFundMe had stalled at $18,000, and I'd used most of that for medical bills not fully covered by insurance. That night, Emily had a fever of 103 degrees. We spent the night in the emergency room where she received antibiotics for an infection, a common complication with her compromised immune system. As I watched her sleep in the hospital bed, her small body connected to monitors and IV lines, her stuffed giraffe clutched tightly against her side, I made my decision. I would make another appeal to my parents, laying everything on the line. I chose a Tuesday evening when I knew they'd be home alone. Jessica and her family were on a ski trip in Colorado, something I knew because she'd posted daily photos of the twins in matching snowsuits and complained about the quality of service at their luxury resort. My parents seemed surprised when I arrived unannounced. Emily was staying with Hannah, the mother of her best friend from school, who had become an invaluable support during our journey. "I need to talk to you both," I said, declining my mother's offer of coffee. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled slightly. "Emily's condition is worse than we thought. The local treatments aren't working, and her doctor is recommending a specialized center in Houston." I laid out all the details, the success rates, the timeline, the total costs. I showed them Dr. Graham's written recommendation and the brochure from the Houston Center, highlighting the outcomes for children with Emily's specific type of leukemia. This could save her life. I concluded, not bothering to hide the desperation in my voice. "I've done everything possible on my own. I've picked up extra work, sold my car for a cheaper model, even looked into a second mortgage. But I still need help. Please. She's your granddaughter." My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Ronnie, we sympathize with your situation, we really do. But we're talking about experimental treatments with no guarantees. At our age, we have to be extremely careful with our finances." "What your father is saying," my mother interjected, "is that we live on a careful budget now. Our retirement needs to last potentially 20 years or more." "I'm not asking for the full amount," I argued, frustration building. "Even 10 or 15,000 would help tremendously. I can keep working extra shifts, maybe find another loan for the rest." My father shook his head firmly. "We just don't have that kind of liquid cash available. It wouldn't be financially prudent." "Prudent," I repeated, my voice rising despite my determination to remain calm. "We're talking about Emily's life. And we're praying for her every day," my mother said, reaching for my hand, which I pulled away. "God has a plan even when we don't understand it." I stood up, gathering the papers they hadn't bothered to examine closely. "So that's it. Your granddaughter needs life-saving treatment, and you're saying no." "We're saying we can't," my father corrected, his tone indicating the conversation was over. "There's a difference." I left their house that night with a clarity I hadn't possessed before. My parents wouldn't help Emily. I would need to find another way, or accept the standard treatment and its lower success rate. The contrast between my struggle and the support network that materialized around us became increasingly stark. My supervisor at the hospital rearranged schedules to accommodate my needs and started an employee donation fund. Emily's school organized a walkathon that raised nearly $3,000. Complete strangers contributed to our updated GoFundMe after a local news station ran a follow-up story. Meanwhile, my family remained conspicuously absent. Jessica sent occasional text messages asking for updates, but always managed to reference her own children's achievements in the same conversation. "How's Emily doing after her treatment? By the way, Alexander just got selected for the gifted program at school." My parents called weekly with brief, awkward conversations that never acknowledged our last discussion or offered any practical help. They sent Emily a gift basket from an online retailer with a pre-printed card saying, "Get well soon," as if she had a cold, not cancer. 2 months after my failed appeal to my parents at a Sunday dinner, I'd reluctantly attended because Emily had specifically asked to see her cousins. Jessica made an announcement that would plant the first seed of my later discovery. "We've got some exciting news," she said, clinking her fork against her wine glass for attention. "The boys have been accepted to Westfield Academy for next fall." My parents erupted in enthusiastic congratulations while I tried to place the name. "It's the most prestigious private school in the state," Jessica explained, clearly misinterpreting my silence as ignorance rather than exhaustion from another night in the hospital with Emily. "They only accept 20 students per grade, and the educational advantages are simply unparalleled." "That's wonderful," my mother gushed. "The boys deserve the very best education." "Of course the tuition is substantial," Jessica continued with a practiced sigh. $32,000 per year per child. "But Richard and I agree that no investment is more important than our children's future." I nearly choked on my water. $64,000 annually, almost exactly the amount needed for Emily's specialized treatment. I glanced at my parents, who showed no reaction to the figure that had been deemed impossible when it came to their granddaughter's life. "How will you manage that?" I asked Jessica, my tone more pointed than I'd intended. She waved dismissively. "We'll make it work. Sacrifices for education are always worth it." Throughout the remainder of dinner, I observed my parents' animated discussions about the boys' educational prospects, their obvious pride and excitement, a stark contrast to their somber, distant attitude whenever Emily's pride and excitement. Treatment was mentioned. The seed of suspicion was planted, but in those moments I was too focused on Emily's immediate needs to water it. The Houston Treatment Center would have to wait. We would continue fighting with the resources we had, and I would keep searching for ways to afford the better option. What I didn't know then was that the truth was far worse than I suspected, and it would come to light only after it was too late to make a difference for my daughter. Emily's condition deteriorated steadily over the next 4 months. The standard treatments continued to fall short, and infections became more frequent and severe as her immune system weakened. Hospital stays stretched from days into weeks. I took a family medical leave from work, surviving on savings and the generosity of the hospital's employee emergency fund. Despite everything, Emily remained my brave girl. On good days, we played board games in her hospital room or watched baking shows she had become obsessed with. She sketched elaborate designs for cakes she planned to make when I get better. On harder days, when pain and nausea overwhelmed her, she still managed to thank her nurses and apologize for being too tired to play. Dr. Graham continued advocating for the Houston treatment, even reaching out to the center to negotiate costs and explore charity care options. But time was working against us. Emily's latest scans showed the cancer spreading to her central nervous system, dramatically reducing her odds of recovery without the specialized treatment we couldn't afford. By winter, Emily was too weak to leave the hospital. I slept in the recliner beside her bed every night, going home only to shower and change clothes. My parents visited once a week, staying briefly, and always seeming relieved to leave. Jessica came by once a month at most, usually when she happened to be in the area for something else. On a snowy January morning with weak winter sunlight filtering through the hospital window, Emily took a turn for the worse. Her breathing became labored, her oxygen levels dropping despite supplemental oxygen. The medical team worked for hours to stabilize her while I stood pressed against the wall of her room, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. That evening, as monitors beeped steadily in the background, Emily opened her eyes and looked at me with surprising clarity. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm tired of fighting." I took her small hand, mindful of the IV line. "I know, sweetheart. You've been so brave. Is it okay if I rest now?" The question broke something inside me, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Yes, Emily. It's okay. I'll be right here with you." She smiled faintly. "I love you, Daddy. Forever and always and infinity." "Forever and always and infinity plus one," I replied, our standard exchange since she was 4. Emily died peacefully in her sleep that night. She was 10 years old. I sat holding her hand for hours afterward, unable to comprehend a world that would continue spinning without her in it. The funeral was small. Emily's teachers and classmates, neighbors, my coworkers, and the medical staff who had become like family over the previous year. My parents attended, of course, looking appropriately somber, but somehow detached, as if at a distant acquaintance's service rather than their granddaughter's. Jessica arrived late and left early, citing the twins' swimming lessons. The weeks after Emily's death passed in a fog. I returned to work because routine was the only thing keeping me functioning. Friends checked in regularly, dropping off meals I barely touched, and offering companionship I rarely accepted. My parents called occasionally with awkward condolences that never acknowledged the desperate measures that might have saved her. 6 months after losing Emily, I was existing rather than living. My house remained filled with her things, her stuffed animals arranged on her bed, her art projects magnetized to the refrigerator, her shoes still by the door. I couldn't bear to pack them away, as if doing so would erase the last tangible evidence that she had been real. It was during this period of numbed grief that I made the discovery that would eventually lead to the confrontation at my parents' dinner table. My father called one afternoon unusually flustered, explaining that their home computer was acting up and asking if I could come over to fix it. Under normal circumstances, I would have talked him through basic troubleshooting over the phone, but the thought of a practical task, something concrete I could actually fix, held appeal. I arrived to find my parents heading out the door late for a doctor's appointment they'd forgotten. "Just let yourself in and take a look," my father said, handing me the spare key. "We shouldn't be more than an hour or two." Alone in their house, I sat at the desktop computer in their home office. The issue was minor. Multiple browser windows and tabs, slowing things down. But as I closed the excess programs, I noticed a spreadsheet left open in the background. The file name caught my eye. Grandchildren, Education, Fund, 2LSX. I knew I should simply close it and finish my task. But something curiosity, suspicion, or perhaps Emily's memory compelled me to look closer. The spreadsheet detailed regular payments to Westfield Academy, Jessica's twins' private school. Payments of $32,000 per child per year. Payments that had begun 2 years ago during Emily's treatment. My hands shaking, I scrolled through the document, finding not only tuition payments, but also deposits into a future education account established when the twins were born. The account currently held over $120,000 earmarked for their college educations. A sick feeling grew in my stomach as I opened their financial management software still logged in on the desktop. There I found evidence of a substantial investment portfolio, a vacation property in Florida I'd never heard mentioned, and liquid assets that far exceeded the fixed retirement income they'd claimed, prevented them from helping Emily. I took screenshots and photos of the evidence with my phone, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. My parents had lied. They had money, significant money, and had chosen to invest it in their favorite daughter's children while refusing to help save their granddaughter's life. When I heard their car pulling into the driveway, I quickly closed everything except the original browser windows I'd been asked to fix. I completed the task, mechanically accepted their thanks with a wooden smile, and left before my roiling emotions could betray me. Driving home, the full weight of the discovery pressed down on me. It wasn't just that they could have helped but chose not to. It was that they had actively lied about their financial situation while funding educational luxuries for the twins. The contrast was so stark, so cruel, that I couldn't formulate a coherent response. Emily might still be alive if they had helped. That thought played on repeat as I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car, unable to move, staring at the empty swing set in the backyard that Emily would never use again. The days following my discovery were among the darkest I'd experienced since Emily's death. The initial shock gave way to waves of emotion that threatened to drown me, rage, so intense it left me shaking, grief that reopened like a fresh wound, betrayal that tainted every family memory. I avoided my parents making excuses to miss the next 2 Sunday dinners. I stopped answering their calls, responding only with brief texts claiming I was busy or not feeling well. Jessica's occasional messages received similarly terse replies. I couldn't trust myself to interact with any of them without the truth exploding out in ways I might regret. Sleep, already elusive since Emily's passing, became nearly impossible. I would lie awake replaying moments from her treatment, her courage during painful procedures, her apologizing for being expensive after overhearing a conversation about medical bills, her faith that everything would be okay because families take care of each other. Each memory now carried the poisonous knowledge that help had been available but deliberately withheld. During the day, I functioned on autopilot. Work provided a welcome distraction, but evenings in Emily's too-quiet house became unbearable. I found myself driving aimlessly, sometimes parking near my parents' house, and sitting in darkness imagining confrontations where I shouted the truth until they crumbled under its weight. I fantasized about exposing them publicly, showing the financial evidence to extended family, posting it online, even contacting the local newspaper that had covered Emily's fundraisers. In my darkest moments, I considered cutting them out of my life, completely changing my phone number and moving away without a forwarding address. 2 weeks after my discovery, I realized I needed help processing these emotions before they consumed me. I contacted a grief counselor who had reached out after Emily's funeral, scheduling an emergency session. Dr. Lynette Marshall listened without judgment as I poured out the whole story, the years of favoritism, the rejected pleas for help, the devastating discovery of their finances, and the twins' education fund. What I can't understand, I said, my voice hoarse from talking, is how they could do this. How could anyone choose private school for healthy grandchildren over life-saving treatment for a sick one? She considered my question carefully. Sometimes people build narratives about fairness that aren't really fair at all. They might tell themselves they're being equitable by investing in all grandchildren according to predetermined plans, regardless of changing circumstances. But Emily needed that money to live, I countered. I know, she said gently, and there's no justification for their choice. But understanding possible motivations might help you decide how to proceed. Over the next few sessions, Dr. Marshall helped me explore options for addressing this betrayal. The desire for revenge remained strong, but she encouraged me to consider what Emily would want and what would ultimately help me heal. Publicly exposing your parents might provide momentary satisfaction, she acknowledged, but consider whether that aligns with your values or Emily's memory. There are ways to confront this directly that don't involve scorched earth. We discussed boundaries, forgiveness versus reconciliation, and how to honor Emily's legacy while protecting my own well-being. Throughout these conversations, one truth became increasingly clear. Silence wasn't an option. The secret knowledge was poisoning me from within. For any healing to begin, the truth needed to be spoken aloud. What about just cutting them off? I asked during one session. Never seeing them again. That's absolutely you're right, Dr. Marshall said, but consider whether you'd be satisfied without first telling them why. Unspoken truths have a way of following us even into estrangement. As I grappled with these questions, my mother called to invite me to their 40th wedding anniversary dinner. Just family, she emphasized. Jessica, Richard, the boys, and you. We've missed you at Sunday dinners. The timing felt like either cosmic irony or perfect opportunity. After discussing it with Dr. Marshall, I decided to accept the invitation. If I was going to confront them, this setting a celebration of family bonds seemed fitting. In the days leading up to the dinner, I prepared methodically. I made copies of the financial evidence and stored them in a folder. I wrote down key points I wanted to make, knowing emotions might cloud my thinking in the moment. I practiced what I would say, focusing on facts rather than accusations, though the distinction felt academic when the facts themselves were so damning. Dr. Marshall helped me set boundaries for the confrontation. You can't control how they'll react, she warned. They might become defensive, deny everything, or try to paint you as irrational with grief. Be prepared for that. What if they apologize? I asked, though I couldn't imagine it. Then you'll need to decide what, if anything, that changes for you. Apologies don't erase consequences or bring Emily back. The evening before the dinner, I visited Emily's grave for the first time in weeks. The small headstone featured a carved giraffe, her favorite animal, and the inscription "Forever and Always in Infinity." I sat on the grass beside her, watching sunset colors paint the sky. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Em, I said aloud. But I can't keep pretending everything's normal when it's not. They should have helped you. They could have, and they chose not to. I don't know if that's something I can ever forgive. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers I'd brought, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since my discovery. Whatever happened tomorrow, speaking the truth would honor Emily's memory better than preserving a facade of family harmony built on lies. I love you, kiddo, I whispered, standing to leave. Forever and always and infinity plus one. As I drove home, I felt a strange clarity. Tomorrow would be difficult, possibly devastating, but necessary. Emily had faced her illness with courage and honesty. I could face my family with the same. My parents' anniversary dinner was scheduled for 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening in August. I arrived precisely on time, a small gift bag containing a photo frame in hand, maintaining appearances until the moment was right. Their house looked the same as always, meticulously maintained lawn seasonal wreaths on the front door, family photos arranged carefully on the entryway table. The familiarity felt jarring against my new understanding of the secrets hidden beneath. Jessica, Richard, and the twins were already there, the boys racing through the house in matching polo shirts while Jessica sipped wine in the living room. My mother embraced me with her usual perfunctory hug, commenting on my weight loss. My father clapped me on the shoulder, his standard greeting that passed for affection in his repertoire. "We've missed you these past few weeks," my mother said, accepting the gift with a practiced smile. "It's good to have everyone together again." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond naturally. The folder with the evidence felt impossibly heavy in my jacket pocket. Dinner was elaborate. My mother's special occasion: pot roast fresh rolls, roasted vegetables from their garden, and a decadent chocolate cake for dessert. The dining room gleamed with their best china and crystal glasses, a stark contrast to the hospital cafeteria food I'd subsisted on during Emily's final months. Conversation flowed around me, mostly centered on the twins' accomplishments and Jessica's recent spa weekend. I contributed minimal responses when directly addressed, observing how easily my family carried on without acknowledging the empty chair where Emily should have been. The first real trigger came when Alexander mentioned his new science class at Westfield Academy. "Grandpa, they have a real laboratory. We get to use microscopes next week." "That's wonderful," my father enthused. "A good science foundation is invaluable. That's exactly why we wanted you boys in a quality school." We wanted. The casual admission of involvement sent heat rushing to my face. I took a long drink of water, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Midway through the main course, my mother raised her wine glass. "I'd like to propose a toast. To 40 years of marriage, to our beautiful family, and to always being there for each other through life's challenges." The words "being there for each other" struck me like a physical blow. Jessica immediately followed with her own toast, standing to ensure all attention was on her. "To the most generous parents anyone could ask for," she said, her voice saccharine. "Mom and Dad, you've always put family first, and your support means everything to us." The twins, clearly coached, added their own tribute. "Thank you, Grandma and Grandpa, for helping us go to the best school ever." I felt physically ill. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my fork, the food now tasteless in my mouth. The carefully scripted confrontation I'd planned evaporated, replaced by a visceral need to speak the truth that had been buried for too long. "How much does Westfield Academy cost again?" I asked, my voice cutting through the sentimental atmosphere. Jessica looked annoyed at the interruption of her moment. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the exact figure," I said, maintaining a calm I didn't feel. "32,000 per year per child," Richard answered, oblivious to the tension. "Worth every penny for the educational advantage, though." $64,000 annually, I said slowly, looking directly at my parents. "That's quite a commitment." My father shifted uncomfortably. "The boy's education is important. Important enough to establish a special fund," for I continued, reaching into my jacket to remove the folder. "A grandchildren education fund, I believe it's called." The room went silent. My mother's face paled slightly. "Ronnie, what are you talking about?" I opened the folder and laid out the first page, a screenshot of their spreadsheet. "This is what I'm talking about. The fund you set up for the twins' education. The one you've been contributing to since they were born. The one that currently holds over $120,000 for their future college expenses." My father's expression hardened. "You went through our personal financial information." "Not intentionally. I found it while fixing your computer. But that's hardly the point, is it?" I placed another document on the table. "The point is that while Emily was dying, while I was begging you for help with a treatment that could have saved her life, you claimed you couldn't afford it because of your fixed retirement income." "Jessica," interjected Ronnie, "this is hardly the time." "When would be a better time, Jessica?" "Next month, next year. After we've all pretended long enough that what happened was unavoidable." I turned back to my parents. "You lied to me. You had the money. You chose not to help Emily." My mother's hands fluttered nervously. "It wasn't that simple, Ronnie. We have financial obligations, plans that were already in place. Plans more important than Emily's life." My voice cracked slightly. She was 10 years old. She fought so hard, and she might still be alive if she'd gotten the treatment Dr. Graham recommended. "There were no guarantees that experimental treatment would work," my father said defensively. "We had to make practical decisions about where to allocate our resources." "Practical decisions," I repeated the words, tasting bitter. "Tell me, what was the practical value of letting Emily die while ensuring the twins can learn to use microscopes in their private school laboratory?" Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should take the boys into the other room. No, I said firmly. They should hear this. They should know what their education cost. My mother began to cry tears that seemed more about her discomfort than genuine remorse. We loved Emily, she insisted. But we couldn't throw away our savings on treatments that might not work. We have to think about the future. Emily doesn't have a future. The words exploded from me louder than intended, causing the twins to flinch. She doesn't get to grow up or go to college, or fall in love, or have a family. She's gone, and you could have helped save her, but you decided your retirement portfolio and the twins' private education were more important. Jessica stood up, face flushed with anger. That's enough. You can't blame Mom and Dad for Emily's death. Cancer killed her, not them. You're just looking for someone to blame because you can't accept what happened. I accept exactly what happened. I countered, struggling to keep my voice steady. Emily got sick. There was a treatment that might have saved her. It cost approximately what you spend on private school tuition. I asked for help. Our parents lied about their ability to provide that help while secretly funding educational luxuries for your children. My father pushed his chair back from the table. Emily was already too sick. The doctors said her chances weren't good even with the experimental treatment. This new rationalization landed like a blow. That's not true. She had a 70% chance with the targeted therapy. When did you speak to her doctors? We didn't, he admitted reluctantly. But you have to understand, Ronnie. We've worked our entire lives to build security for this family. We can't just deplete our savings on medical gambles. A medical gamble, I repeated numbly. That's what Emily's life was to you. A gamble not worth taking. Martha dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. We thought, it seemed like the kindest thing was to let nature take its course, rather than putting her through more treatments that might not work. The room spun slightly as the full impact of her words hit me. You decided without consulting her doctors or me that she wasn't worth saving, that it was better to let her die than spend money you'd earmarked for other purposes. Richard made another attempt at mediation. I'm sure your parents were just trying to be practical about a difficult situation. Healthcare decisions are complex. Don't I cut him off? Just don't. This wasn't your decision to make. It wasn't their decision either. It was mine as Emily's father, and hers as someone fighting for her life. And you all robbed us of options that might have saved her. Jessica stood abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything because you're still grieving. Mom and Dad have always treated us fairly. Fairly, I laughed without humor. Is that what you call it? When have they ever said no to anything you wanted? When have they ever chosen my needs or Emily's over yours or the twins? When Emily was diagnosed, you all treated it like an inconvenience to your perfect family narrative rather than a crisis that deserved your full support. My mother reached across the table toward me, her hand trembling. Ronnie, please, you need to calm down. We can discuss this rationally. I am being rational, I said, gathering the documents back into the folder. For the first time since Emily died, I'm seeing everything with perfect clarity. You had a choice, and you chose the twins over Emily. You chose Jessica over me. You've always made that choice, but this time it had fatal consequences. My father stood, his face flushed. That's enough. I won't have you accusing us like this in our own home. We did what we thought was best with the resources we had. What you thought was best, I echoed. Well, congratulations on your 40 years of marriage and your wonderful investment portfolio and your gifted grandsons with their prestigious education. I hope it brings you comfort when you think about the granddaughter you could have helped but chose not to. The twins were openly crying now, confused and frightened by the adult conflict erupting around them. Jessica shouted for me to leave, that I was ruining everything as usual. Richard tried to usher the boys from the room while my mother sobbed dramatically, and my father demanded I apologize. I remained strangely calm as chaos erupted around me. The truth had been spoken aloud at last, and whatever happened next, I knew Emily would be proud that I had stood up for her. As voices rose and accusations flew, I walked quietly to the door. Emily deserved better from all of you, I said from the threshold, and so did I. I left amid the continuing chaos, the sound of my sister's angry voice, and my mother's sobs fading as I closed the door behind me. In my car, I sat for a long moment, hands shaking slightly as adrenaline coursed through my system. For the first time since discovering the truth about my parents' finances, I felt something like peace. The confrontation hadn't gone as planned. It had been messier, more raw, less articulate, but the burden of unspoken knowledge had finally been lifted. Emily's voice seemed to echo in my mind. "The truth sets you free, Daddy. That's what you always told me." And driving away from my parents' house that night, I felt the first tentative steps toward freedom from the chains of family obligation that had bound me for so long. That night after the confrontation, I drove home through quiet streets, the weight of decades finally lifted from my shoulders. The chaos I'd left behind at my parents' anniversary dinner, the shouting, the tears, the accusations felt distant, already separated from me by the truth that had finally been spoken aloud. At home, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey and sat on the back porch looking up at stars Emily and I used to count together. For the first time since her death, I slept through the night without nightmares or interruption, a dreamless, peaceful sleep that felt like the first real rest I'd had in years. The aftermath came in waves over the following days. My phone filled with missed calls and messages, angry tirades from Jessica accusing me of cruelty and selfishness, tearful voicemails from my mother, pleading for understanding, terse texts from my father demanding an apology. Richard sent an awkwardly formal message suggesting family counseling. I read or listened to each one but responded to none, needing space to process my own emotions before engaging with theirs. Friends who had known Emily noticed the change in me immediately. "You seem different, Hannah," my daughter's best friend's mother observed when I ran into her at the grocery store. Still sad, but lighter somehow. I finally told the truth, I explained simply, about my parents and the treatment they refused to help with. Hannah, who had witnessed my desperate fundraising efforts during Emily's illness, squeezed my arm. "Good. It's about time they faced what they did." 2 weeks after the confrontation, I sat down to write a letter to time and space to determine what, if any, contact I wish to have with you in the future. Please respect this boundary. I mailed the letter with no expectation of a meaningful response, but the act of sending it felt significant, another step toward reclaiming my narrative and Emily's. Around this time, I made a decision about the money remaining in Emily's medical fund, approximately $8,000 raised through the GoFundMe campaign that we hadn't used before her death. After consultation with the hospital's patient advocacy office, I donated it to their pediatric cancer research program in Emily's name. She would have liked knowing she was helping other kids, I told Dr. Graham when I delivered the check, even if it didn't save her. Dr. Graham, who had fought alongside us throughout Emily's illness, embraced me for the first time. She was an extraordinary child, the kind who leaves a mark on the world even in a short life. This conversation sparked another idea. Working with Emily's former school principal, I established a small memorial scholarship in her name, the Emily Foster Courage Award for a student demonstrating exceptional bravery in the face of adversity. The annual $500 award wasn't large, but it would keep her memory alive in a community that had supported us through our darkest days. Jessica continued to alternate between angry messages and tearful pleas for reconciliation, never quite acknowledging the core issue. After several weeks, I finally responded with a brief but direct email. "I'm not interested in pretending nothing happened or that our family dynamic is healthy. If you want a relationship moving forward, it needs to begin with honesty. That means acknowledging the favoritism that has shaped our family for decades and the devastating consequences of the choices made during Emily's illness. Until that happens, I need distance." Her response was predictably defensive, but contained the first hint of potential growth. "I don't agree with how you've characterized everything, but I am sorry about Emily. I know the twins' education is a sensitive subject. Maybe we could talk about it someday when things aren't so raw." It wasn't the full reckoning I might have hoped for, but it represented a tiny crack in the wall of denial, a possible starting point for future conversations if I chose to have them. My parents' response to my letter came 3 weeks after I sent it, a typed formal message that read more like a legal disclaimer than a personal communication. They regretted any misunderstandings about their financial situation and deeply mourned Emily, but maintained that their decisions had been made in good faith, based on information available at the time. No acknowledgement of the lies, the favoritism, or the devastating impact of their choices. I filed the letter away without responding. Their inability to face the truth confirmed that distance was the right choice, for now, perhaps forever. Some relationships should not be salvaged at the expense of honesty and self-respect. As fall turned to winter, I began to rebuild my life in small, meaningful ways. I joined a support group for parents who had lost children, finding connection with others who understood grief's landscape without explanation. There I met Michael and Diane, whose daughter had died of the same type of leukemia as Emily 2 years earlier. Our shared experience created an immediate bond that evolved into a deep friendship. The hardest part after Lily died was the people who expected us to move on after some arbitrary time period. Diane told me one evening after a group session, as if there's an expiration date on missing your child. Or the ones who act like mentioning Emily will somehow remind me she's gone as if I ever forget. I added, grateful for companions who understood these peculiar aspects of parental grief. Through the support group, I connected with the Children's Hospital's volunteer program and began spending Saturday mornings in the pediatric oncology ward reading to patients or playing games with kids well enough to participate. The nurses who had cared for Emily welcomed me back in this new role, and something healing happened in these hours given to children fighting battles similar to hers. 6 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from Alexander, one of the twins, sent from what appeared to be a school email account. Now, 11 years old, he wrote with surprising maturity about missing Emily and feeling confused about the family conflict. Mom says it's complicated grown-up stuff, but I remember when Emily was sick and I wish we could have helped more. I think about her a lot. I responded carefully, thanking him for his kind words about Emily and assuring him that the conflict between the adults wasn't his responsibility or fault. Emily thought you and William were the coolest cousins ever, I told him truthfully. She kept the birthday cards you made her on her bulletin board until the end. This exchange, simple as it was, reminded me that the next generation might break the dysfunctional patterns if given the chance. The boys hadn't chosen their advantages or created the inequity. They were simply children benefiting from their grandparents' problematic priorities. As the 1-year anniversary of Emily's death approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I invited my parents, Jessica, and her family to join a small memorial gathering at Emily's favorite park. This is not a reconciliation or pretense that nothing has changed, I wrote in the invitation. It is simply an opportunity to remember Emily together if you choose to attend. I expected refusals wrapped in excuses, but to my surprise they all came. The memorial was brief and largely silent. A release of biodegradable balloons, a reading of Emily's favorite poem, and a moment of reflection beside the duck pond she had loved. My parents looked older than I remembered, more fragile somehow. Jessica kept her distance but made eye contact for the first time in months, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. No miraculous healing occurred, no tearful reconciliations or dramatic apologies. But in that shared moment of remembering Emily, something subtle shifted. We had acknowledged her life and loss together without pretense or deflection. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't sure that would ever be possible, but it was perhaps the first step toward a different kind of truth. In the year since that confrontation at the dinner table, I've learned that healing isn't linear and rarely complete. There are still days when grief overwhelms me, when anger at my parents' betrayal burns hot, when the absence of Emily feels like a physical wound. But there are also moments of unexpected peace, of gratitude for the time we had together, of pride in how bravely she faced each day. I've come to understand that family is defined by actions, not blood, by who shows up when it matters most, not who shares your DNA. My chosen family now includes Hannah and her daughter Lily, Michael, and Diane from the support group, co-workers who became friends during Emily's illness, and neighbors who still bring occasional meals just because. The truth is both simpler and more complex than I imagined on the night I confronted my parents. Speaking it was necessary for my healing, but it couldn't change the past or bring Emily back. It couldn't make my parents understand the depth of their betrayal or magically transform our family dynamic. What it did do was free me from the obligation to pretend to accept scraps of conditional love, to participate in a family narrative built on favoritism and denial. Emily taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to face it anyway. In her honor, I try to live with that same courage, facing grief, truth, and the future one day at a time. Her voice still guides me in quiet moments. Forever and always and infinity, Daddy. Forever and always and infinity, +1, my brave girl. Your life mattered. Your story deserves to be told. And the truth, however painful, honors your memory better than comfortable lies ever could. Have you ever had to confront family members about painful truths? How did you find the strength to speak up when it mattered? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of courage and healing. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the strength to speak your own truth when the time comes.